Chapter 301 Heirs to the Throne. Chapter 301 Heirs to the Throne. As Sunny sat on the cold stones, wiping blood off his face and wincing from pain, the whole castle shook slightly, and dust fell from the ceiling of the wide corridor. Looking up, he frowned slightly, then turned to Haruz and indifferently cut a strip of cloth from the hunchback's garments. The corpse didn't mind. Tying the cloth around his head to stop the blood from streaming into his eyes, Sunny sighed and summoned the runes. Shadow Fragments, 956/1000. Such an injustice! His battle with Haruz was one of the toughest he had experienced on the Forgotten Shore, but all he got from it was one measly shadow fragment. This was one of the lamentable quirks of the shadow slave aspect. It didn't differentiate between humans and nightmare creatures at all. From its point of view, Haruz was nothing but a dormant beast. Or maybe it was a blessing in disguise. Killing humans is a really unlucrative business, Sunny said with regret and glanced in the direction of the throne room, where the terrible battle still raged on. Several hundred humans driven insane by fury and bloodlust could create a lot of destruction in a very short amount of time. Several hundred powerful sleepers, each in possession of an aspect ability, were so much worse. Add the echoes in the mix, and Sunny shuddered to imagine what was going on back in the Great Hall right now. The number of lives being extinguished every second up there must have been immense. The members of the host, the followers of Changing Star, and everyone unlucky enough to exist on the Forgotten Shore today were dying by the score. Blood was flowing like a river in the halls of the Bright Castle, just like Cassie had predicted all those months ago. Just like Sunny had feared it would. What was Nephi's thinking? Her ambition had never been to become the ruler of the Dark City. Wresting the control over the ancient castle from Gunlog had always been just a means to an end. Her true goal had always been in the Crimson Spire, where the terror of the Forgotten Shore dwelt. From that point of view, this massacre was such a waste. Of potential soldiers, of countless memories, of every other potential resource she was going to need to reach the gateway. But then, was it really, after all, the rest of humanity was not bound by the strangeness of the divine aspect Sunny possessed. When one awakened killed another, they received a vast portion of the soul essence their enemy had accumulated. A lot of it simply disappeared, but what remained was more than enough. The Crimson Spire was not a place one could conquer with cannon fodder. So really, Nephis did not need 1,000 weak humans. What she really needed was a few hundred powerful, battle-tested fighters. What was happening in the Bright Castle right now was not a waste. It was consolidation. Sunny sighed and rose to his feet, summoning the Midnight Shard from the darkness of his soul. It was time to rejoin the battle. ******* In the end, almost 200 people perished on that day. Despite all that death, the battle ended in a bitter draw, and the main reason for this were only 3 people, Nephis, Tezai, and Gemma. No matter how powerful and skilled the rest of the sleepers participating in the battle were, no one stood a chance in a fight against either one of these 3. Not even Castor, who by then many had believed to be one of the strongest fighters in all of Dark City due to his incredible skill, powerful aspect, and noble background. When the proud legacy clashed against the leader of the hunters, his enchanted yen quickly found its way into Gemma's heart. However, to everyone's horror, the tall man did not even blink after receiving the mortal wound. And just a few short moments later, it magically closed, not leaving even a scar behind. No matter how many times Castor had cut or pierced the body of the fearsome hunter, Gemma's flesh simply restored itself. It was as though the proud legacy was cutting water. Gemma's aspect ability made him nearly immortal, while his incredible skill, cunning, and might made him a herald of death. Tezai was equally as formidable. His powerful aspect ability was tied to cold and ice. It allowed him to both make his skin hard as stone and debilitate his enemies, turning their movements slow and stiff. What was worse, it countered Nef's flames to a large degree. Eventually, when the death toll became too large, all 3 gave their followers a command to retreat. By the end of the day, the new lord of the Bright Castle was still not decided. The castle itself became divided between three warring factions, led by the three contenders to the throne. The largest and strongest faction, one with the most fighters and most memories to arm them, was formed by the alliance between Tez Sai and the leader of handmaidens, Saishan. Together, the guards and the handmaidens became a force that the other two factions could not challenge openly. They held the northern and western parts of the castle, where most of the strategic and easily defendable areas of it were situated. The second faction was led by Gemma and Kido, the chief artisan. While the two of them had fewer fighters than both other factions, each of these fighters was worth a dozen. They were the hunters, the most experienced and formidable sleepers in all of the Dark City. Although the territory this faction held was not large, it was of utmost importance, since they controlled the only reliable source of food and water in the Bright Castle. The last faction belonged to Nephi alone. She controlled the southern part of the castle, where its main gate was situated, as well as the outer settlement, to where many of the previous inhabitants of the ancient citadel had fled in hope of finding shelter. However, they quickly realized that there was no more safety anywhere in the Dark City. With Gunlog gone, all order disappeared. No one went on hunts to bring back food, no one manned the walls to drive the nightmare creatures away, no one was there to stop the crime and violence that blossomed in darkness off anarchy. And things weren't going to change until a new lord usurped the White Throne. The bloody struggle for the crown had begun. Chapter 302 Status Quo. Chapter 302 Status Quo. In the next couple of weeks, the Bright Castle had become a strange place. Inside its magnificent halls, barricades were built and 3 makeshift fortresses appeared, each faction holding a specific territory. Beyond these protected areas, there was no man's land. Going outside of a faction's stronghold was often tantamount to death. And no one knew what they would encounter there. Corpses littered the floor, with an occasional marauder hiding in the darkness. With no more law, tyrannical as it had been, many people gave in to their darkest impulses. But these wretches were the least of the dangers that now populated the castle. A much worse fate was to stumble onto a patrol or a war party of another faction. The guards especially were quick to slaughter anyone they met, sometimes in gruesome and inventive ways. The hunters and the followers of Changing Star were equally as ruthless, but at least not without reason or provocation. But the most terrifying change was that now, humans weren't the only ones populating the ancient citadel anymore. After Gunlog's death, too many people were killed, and the rest were too busy with their little war to keep defending the castle. And just like that, after so many years, the nightmare creatures had returned under its roof. Some were killed by the representatives of the factions, but some managed to hide themselves and create nests somewhere in the depths of the stronghold. No one knew how many there were, but the terror kept people awake at night. There were also a lot of rumors going around, one more frightening than the other. The most persistent of them told of a horrible creature called Bloodlord, which apparently stalked the corridors of the Bright Castle and killed humans, tearing their throats open with sharp fangs and consuming all of their blood. Some even thought that it was Gunlug himself, who returned from the grave to bring vengeance to his killers. Sunny was doubtful of these rumors up until the moment when he had found a bloodless corpse of a young guard on one of his patrols. For a moment, he felt fear creep into his heart. He knew what the blood flowers were, after all. But then he calmed himself down, remembering that the Bright Lord's body had been destroyed during the massacre that followed his death. If the corpse of Gunlog wasn't walking around drinking people's blood though, then what was? There were a lot of disturbing things happening in the castle these days. Apart from the frequent but minor skirmishes between the factions, people kept dying in all manner of morbid ways. He didn't even want to think about it. There was no safe place anywhere now, except for maybe the 3 strongholds. The outer settlement had been completely abandoned. At first, Nephi had tried to create a safe haven there for those who did not wish to participate in the war. But she was quickly taught a bloody lesson by her enemies. Spreading her forces too thin was simply an invitation for an attack. After that, all of her followers, willing or unwilling, had relocated to the southern part of the castle and joined the ranks of her fighting force, and yet, even 2 weeks later, nothing had changed. The three factions continued their bloody struggle, unable to break the status quo. Soon, something had to change. One evening, Sunny was sitting on a crate in one of the halls of Changing Star's stronghold. In his hand was a bowl with a measly ration, which he nevertheless was eating with a lot of enthusiasm. A few meters away from him, a couple of Neff's followers were doing the same while having a conversation. Out of boredom, he listened to their voices as he ate. "Have you heard? They found another dead guard near the throne room. The Blood Lord got him. Good riddance. That thing really creeps me out, though. Yeah. Scary. But do you know what I'm really afraid of?" The slum dweller looked at his partner, who had been paying a tribute to live in the castle just a few weeks ago, and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Haruz. That creepy bastard. Where is he now? Damn, if I were able to dream, I would be having nightmares about that butcher every night." "Wait. You didn't hear? What? He's dead." The tributary opened his eyes wide, while Sunny turned away and tried to suppress a smile. "No way." "Yeah. They found his body after the big battle in a hidden passage behind the throne. Someone had beaten him to death. With bare fists. That's what I heard." For a few seconds there was silence. Then one of them said, "What kind of human could kill that monster? With bare hands?" The slum dweller shivered. "That's the thing. No one knows. All of the powerhouses were accounted for. You saw it yourself, they were all fighting in the throne room. Crap. Now I am even more scared. Haruz was dreadful enough, but to think that there's a person in this castle who is powerful enough to kill him so easily, while remaining completely unnoticed and unknown, for all this time, damn, that's terrifying." The slum dweller gave him a nod and turned to Sunny. "Hey. Sunny, right? You're Lady Nephi's scout? Who do you think could kill Haruz?" Sunny thought for a moment, and then said honestly, "Well, apart from yours truly, who is a true terror on the battlefield and possibly one of the deadliest sleepers to ever exist in the world, I think Cassie could." The young man stared at him with disapproval and then shook his head. "Not cool, man. Boasting is fine, I guess, but mocking Lady Cassia was really low of you." Sunny blinked. When did he mock Cassie? Considering the aspect ability that Haruz had possessed, she was really the next best person to fight the hunchback after Sunny himself. She was already blind and adapted to fighting in that state as best as she could. With the help of her echoes, Cassie stood a good chance of surviving that battle. With an apologetic smile, he shrugged and said, "Sorry, I just chose my words badly. In any case, I'm off." With that, he jumped off the crate and headed toward the barricade that served as the border of the faction's stronghold. The slum dweller raised his eyebrows. "Where are you going?" "The night is approaching." Sunny grinned. "Hunting for a big one." Don't worry. I lived in the Dark City for 3 months, remember? Nothing is going to happen to me today." Chapter 303 Helpful Shadow. Chapter 303 Helpful Shadow. The slum dweller pressed his finger against his lips and hissed in exasperation. "Take that back. Are you crazy?" Sunny blinked. "What? No. Well, I was crazy for a while. But now I am not." The young man looked at him with doubt and shook his head. "Still, don't jinx yourself. Do you at least have a memory to keep you safe?" The question of arming themselves was a big problem for Neff's followers. More than half of them didn't have a memory armor or a weapon, having to make do with mundane armaments fashioned out of anything that was at hand. It was one of the reasons why fighting against the guards and the hunters was so hard for them. The other guy, the one who used to pay tribute, sighed and called out to his friend. "Have you lost your mind? You are talking to a member of Lady Nephi's personal cohort. Of course he has memories. With that, both of them looked down on their own makeshift swords. These two were among those who wielded black claws, blades made out of the talons of the spire messenger Sunny and the rest had killed. Their bases were wrapped with leather, allowing a person to use the long curved talon as a weapon. Considering that these talons came from a fallen monster, as far as weapons went, they were some of the best. Wielding them efficiently was not an easy task, though. The slum dweller grimaced. Right. Damn! I am proud to wield one of the black claws, don't get me wrong. But if each of us had a proper set of memories, those bastards wouldn't be picking us off one by one anymore, that's for sure. Sunny looked at him with a complicated expression. Then he smiled. A good memory can change a lot, that's true. As soon as he turned around, the smile disappeared from his face. It's not going to save your lives, though. All of you are just walking corpses. With that, he left the two sleepers behind, climbed over the barricade, and left. Nevertheless, they were right. The lack of memories was a big problem. Sunny walked through the shadows, moving deeper and deeper into the belly of the ancient citadel. The bright castle was enormous in size and had countless twisting corridors. Some were comparatively easy to navigate, while some followed no apparent logic. There were tall towers connected by aerial bridges and deep dungeons full of darkness and danger. There were humans with murder in their hearts prowling these corridors, as well as much more terrifying things. Disturbing sounds sometimes echoed through the stone halls, making Sunny stop and frown out a couple of times. He decided to hide to avoid being noticed by the patrols of the guards or the hunters. Following in their wake, he stumbled on a few fresh bodies and regretted not killing those bastards when he had the chance. Half an hour later, Sunny was somewhere under the main keep of the castle, moving through a dark corridor with careful steps. It was then that he heard the sounds of a struggle coming from beyond the next turn. Ugh, what a bother. Hesitating for a bit, he made the turn and witnessed a scene that was typical in the ancient citadel these days. One human was trying to kill another. In this case, it was a burly guard that seemed vaguely familiar. The large man was pressing someone small and skinny to the wall, strangling them with gauntlet hands. A broken oil lantern was burning on the floor, making the shadows of the two struggling people seem large and menacing. The guard's face had 4 deep scratches on it, which were oozing blood. It was contorted in an expression of rage and dark delight. The face of his victim, meanwhile, was slowly turning blue. It was a petite young woman with dark hair and brown eyes, which were currently full of pain and despair. Just a few moments before she lost consciousness, though, a hand appeared from the darkness and slid a strange transparent dagger across the guard's throat. Hot blood shot into the air, and he fell to the ground with a horrified, gurgling sound. The young woman staggered and drew in a hoarse breath, rubbing her bruised neck. A few moments later, she looked up and cautiously studied her savior. It was a very pale, slender young man with a youthful face and dark, strangely magnetic eyes. Currently, he was wiping his dagger on the sleeve of his armor and staring at the dying guard with an indifferent expression. In fact, he was disturbingly nonchalant, not at all like someone who had just killed another human being. There was neither disgust and fear nor delight and triumph on his face, just nothing at all. It was the face of a cold-blooded killer. Turning to her, the young man smiled. You're Aiko, right? Sunny looked the young woman over, making sure that she wasn't seriously wounded. He knew her a bit from his days in the castle. Back then, she had been one of the few people who were able to pay tribute without worrying about making enough shards to do so the next week. She owned the only gambling den in the Dark City, which automatically made her establishment popular among the members of the host. But it was also the reason why many of them harbored resentment toward the tiny girl. Aiko cautiously nodded. Usually, there were mischievous sparks in her eyes, but right now, there was nothing but subdued fear. Sunny dismissed the moonlight shard and said in a friendly tone, "Nice to meet you. I'm Sunny." The young woman stared at him for a bit, and then said, "You're one of Changing Star's men, right?" He grimaced. "I'm no one's man. I'm completely my own. But yes, currently, Nephice is my employer, I guess. Aiko hesitated and said in a polite and pleasant voice. I see, well, Sunny. Thank you for saving my skin. I'll be going then. Sunny grinned. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that you can go? I think not. In fact, I must insist that you stay. Aiko glanced at the corpse of the guard, then back at the pale young man. Did she imagine it, or were there slight hints of madness in his eyes now? Why didn't you say so? If you want me to stay, then I will definitely stay. It will be my pleasure, really. But, Sunny, why exactly did you want me to stay? He scratched the back of his head and answered after a bit of a pause. Oh, I'm glad that you asked. You see, I am trying to hunt down a big one. And I thought that you would be able to help. Chapter 304 Hunting for a Big One. Chapter 304 Hunting for a Big One. Sunny stared at Aiko, secretly delighted that he didn't have to look up for a change. The young woman's eyes darted into the depths of the corridor, clearly evaluating how good her chances of running away were. They weren't. In the end, she sighed and turned to Sunny with a deep frown. For some reason, such a serious expression looked a bit comical on her petite face. Sunny, was it? Listen, buddy, boss. I am really thankful to you for helping me out, but honestly, do I look like a hunter? How am I supposed to help you hunt? Maybe go ask one of your strong manly friends. Then, her eyes widened. You're not planning on using me as bait, are you? Sunny chuckled. No. Nothing like that. It's just that for this particular hunt, you are the only one who can help. By the way, I didn't just stumble on you by chance. I was watching you for a long time, actually. She paled a little. I see. Well, to each their own, I guess. But still, I am no warrior. I really think that I won't be able to help you out this time, sadly. Sunny shook his head. Relax, Aiko. You see, the big one I'm hunting is a friend of yours. Big, fat bastard named Stev. He's the one I'm after. And I know for a fact that you know where he is hiding. Because you're the one hiding him. So, an expression of utter surprise appeared on Aiko's face. With sincere confusion, she asked, Wait, what? Stev? The memory market guy? Why the spell would I know where he is? She blinked a couple of times, then said in a hesitant tone, Are you sure you're not confusing me with someone, Sunny? He sighed and lingered for a few moments, then rolled his eyes. All right. I don't really want to waste time here, so we'll do it the quick way. Look there. He pointed to his shadow. Aiko lowered her eyes, which then widened when the shadow suddenly turned its head and waved to her. What the? Sunny crossed his arms and said, This here is my shadow. It's an invaluable helper. Among other things, it can walk around on its own and report back to me the things it saw. Guess what it saw yesterday? Aiko paled, staring at the shadow with wide eyes. The shadow stared back at her, full of disdain. So, let's not pretend that you don't know where Stev is. Just take me to him. The young woman glanced at him and gritted her teeth. Then she asked with dark resolve in her eyes, What do you want from him? Sunny raised his eyebrows. What do I want? That guy is walking around with 100 memories in his soul core. Guess. Aiko clenched her tiny fists. He's my friend. I'm not going to. Sunny waved her hand and interrupted her. Oh, don't be so dramatic. I'm not going to do anything bad to him. If I wanted to, I would have killed you already. My shadow saw where you were going already, remember? In fact, Sunny was bluffing. While he was almost sure that Aiko was hiding Stev because of how much food she was stealing every couple of days, too much for such a tiny girl to eat on her own, he had no idea where her hideout was. That was because it was situated somewhere past the guard's territory, and Sunny had avoided sending his shadow anywhere near where Saishin was. A stunned expression appeared on her face. After a while, Aiko asked, You really are not going to hurt us? Sonny offered her his most friendly, honest smile. For some reason, the petite girl shuddered. I am not, you can trust me. I am the most honest man in the world, after all. 2 worlds even. A few hours later, 3 figures were sneaking through the corridors of the bright castle. One was a pale young man in dark leather armor, the second was a petite girl with mischievous eyes, and the third was a giant of a man with a vast round belly. Because of him, all their attempts of being stealthy were rendered practically useless. Nearing another corner, Sonny sighed and gave the other 2 a signal to stop. The guards are patrolling ahead. We'll have to wait for a bit. Stev and Aiko glanced at each other and shrugged. Because of their difference in size, the 2 looked nothing short of comical together. Shaking his head, Sonny summoned the endless spring and took a few sips of water, then offered the beautiful glass bottle to them. Why were you hiding from everyone anyway, Stev? The ample giant looked at him with a sullen expression, then said in a depressed tone. Why else? As soon as this mess started, I knew that people would be coming for me to get the memories. Sonny frowned. The memory market belonged to the host, so why didn't you just go to either Tezai or Gemma? Stev grimaced. I know Tezai too well to go anywhere near him with Lord Gunlog gone. As for Gemma, we're on friendly terms, actually. But that girl, Kido, let's just say that I called her a few names in the past. Over a, business dispute, one might say. Who knew she'll go and become one of the lieutenants? Anyway, I was afraid for my safety because she and Gemma are, you know. Sonny raised an eyebrow, then asked in a curious tone. Then what about Nephi's? Aiko gave him a complicated look. We heard that her people don't treat us castle folk well. And Stev was even officially under the host, so we sort of had nowhere to go. Sonny frowned. There was indeed a measure of internal strife in Nef's faction, with some outer settlement people being against anyone from the castle joining them. Changing Star and the members of her cohort tried to prevent anything too nasty from happening, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. There are a few troublemakers, true. But you'll be fine. Just say that you're with me. He thought for a couple of moments, and then corrected himself. Actually, don't say that. Most of them barely know who I am. Say that you're with Knight. And if Knight asks why are you going around telling people that you're with him, then tell him that you're with me. The 2 of them suddenly looked at him. My buddy Kai is alive! That's wonderful news! Stev said with a wide smile on Aiko's face. A dreamy expression appeared. Why haven't you told me that you knew Knight from the start? That would have made things so much easier. Sonny stared at them and shook his head. Pick up your drool, will you? Why had he even spent a whole hour trying to convince Stev to return with him? He could have just taken Kai with him, and the damn bastard would just say yes after one smile from the beautiful archer. So unfair. Then, he suddenly turned his head and froze. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. The guards that were supposed to walk past his shadow a whole minute ago never appeared. Chapter 305 Trail of Blood. Chapter 305 Trail of Blood. Raising his hand, Sonny gave Aiko and Stev a signal to remain quiet. Then, with a frown, he commanded the shadow to abandon its hiding spot and find the guards. They can't be near us. I would have heard them. Then where did the bastards go? Soon, he had his answer. The 3 guards were in the corridor 100 or so steps from Sonny's current position, just behind a corner. In a place where they shouldn't have been, since it was way off their previous route. They were also dead. Point 2 had their skulls smashed in. Sonny did not know what weapon, tool, or limb was used to kill them, because their memory armors had already disappeared. It had to have been something capable of piercing through steel, though, because the guards had been wearing helmets the last time he saw them. The third was even worse. His throat was torn, seemingly with terribly sharp fangs, to such degree that the young man's head was almost separated from his body. One would expect a sea of blood to come out of such a terrible wound, but in fact, there was surprisingly little of it on the floor. However, the corpse of the guard was unnaturally pale, as if devoid of blood completely. Curses! Sonny felt a cold shiver run through his body. The shadow cautiously looked around, but didn't notice anyone else present on the scene of the gruesome slaughter. Aiko and Stev were staring at Sonny with alarmed expressions. After waiting for several minutes, he finally relaxed a little and motioned for them to follow. What happened? He hesitated for a few seconds, then said in an even tone. The Blood Lord has just been here. Their eyes widened. That fiend? Then why aren't we running? Sonny glanced at them with a calm expression. Don't worry, it's already gone. Inside, however, he was anything but calmed out. A creature capable of killing 3 guards was not necessarily something he would be scared of. One that managed to get past his shadow and slaughter them just 100 steps away without making enough noise to attract his attention. That, on the other hand, was a reason for concern. Just what kind of an abomination is it? Sadly, the 3 of them had to pass the place where the guards had been killed to reach their destination. Soon, the smell of blood hit their nostrils, making Aiko and Stev turn pale. The bodies of the guards looked even more gruesome in person. Sonny frowned slightly, while Aiko and Stev had to struggle to keep the contents of their stomachs inside. Gods, poor bastards! Sonny did not say anything, looking around with a dark expression. He was hoping to notice something that his shadow had missed to give him a clue of what type of nightmare creature the Blood Lord was, exactly. But there were no signs that anyone except for the 3 guards had been in this corridor in a long time. Hey, Sonny? Can we please leave? This crap doesn't seem to bother you, but I mean, Stev seems to be really scared. Just imagine what is going to happen if he faints and falls. The whole castle will hear, probably. Sonny hesitated for a little, then nodded. Just before they left, however, he suddenly noticed something glint in the pool of blood. The shadow had not noticed it earlier because there was nothing to shine on the small object and make it reflect the light back. Crouching, he reached out with his hand and picked up the bloody piece of metal, then brought it close to his eyes to take a closer look. Pressed between his fingers was an intricate silver earring in the shape of a flower blossom. It wasn't a charm memory, though, just a simple piece of jewelry. What is that thing doing here? With a confused scowl, he lingered for a few moments, and then stood up, turning away from the mangled corpses. Let's get out of here. Soon, they returned to the barricades, creating the border of Changing Stars territory. The sleepers standing watch were surprised to see Sonny come back with 2 strangers, but let them in without asking any questions. Aiko raised an eyebrow. Aren't you guys going to inspect us? What if we're spies? The watchmen glanced at each other, and then one of them said, Usually we would. But it's Sonny. The petite young woman smiled. Oh. Is he in very high regard around here? The watchman gave a strange look, then coughed with a bit of embarrassment. It's not that. It's just that starting a conversation with him is, well, you know. A headache. Sonny stared at him with an offended expression. What's that supposed to mean? The watchman hurriedly shook his head. No. Nothing. I need to inspect the barricade. If you'll excuse me. With that, he made a hasty retreat. Did I scam him out of his boots or something? Shaking his head in bewilderment, Sonny turned away and led the 2 newcomers deeper into the stronghold, searching for Nephis. She was alone in a spacious room. Changing Star sat on the floor, wrapping herself in her white cloak, and stared at the wall with a distant expression. These days, Neph was a bit strange. She had always been aloof and hard to read, but now, her usually indifferent face had become completely motionless. Her gray eyes had always been calm, but now, they seemed to be especially cold. Almost empty. Sonny had no idea what was going on with her. Maybe she hasn't recovered from using her aspect ability to its full extent. Still, clearing his throat to attract her attention, Sonny gestured to the giant man and the tiny girl he brought. Hey, Neph. I've recruited these guys. She tilted her head a little and didn't say anything. Sunny smiled. You must remember Aiko. She was the one on whose behalf you had challenged that Pathfinder, Andal, and cut his head off. Then, he glanced at Aiko and narrowed his eyes. The petite girl hurriedly said, Oh, yes. Thank you, Lady Changing Star. That guy was a real menace. Nephi slowly nodded and said evenly, You're welcome. Then, she looked at Stev. And you are? A wide grin appeared on Sunny's face. Oh. This is Stev. Stev is a very special guy. You see, he has 100 battle-ready memories stored in his soul core. With that, Sunny patted Stev on the shoulder and said, Basically, he's going to solve our weapons problem. Chapter 306 Final Confrontation. Chapter 306 Final Confrontation. With all of Memory Market suddenly falling into the hands of Changing Star's faction, the skirmishes happening in the halls of the Bright Castle became even more frequent and brutal. People kept killing each other, slowly painting the Hu Citadel red, and yet, it was still not enough for a winner to emerge. Nephi's was always on the front lines, leading her people and slaying countless enemies with her silver blade, as if alien to the very concept of mercy. Wherever she appeared, blood flowed like a river. She had even clashed against Tezai personally, but their fearsome battle ended in a draw. Now that more than 2 weeks had passed after Gunlog's death and the decimation of the previous order, humans were starting to suffer from the lack of food. There were more and more nightmare creatures finding their way into the castle, too. The situation was slowly turning into an irreversible crisis. In fact, it already had. The civil war raged on, reaping human lives one after another. But it was also forging those who remained alive into much more fearsome, powerful, and hardened fighters. And then, suddenly, the status quo was finally decimated, announcing to everyone left alive in the Bright Castle that the end was drawing close. The new lord was about to take his crown. And it was not going to be the most noble or formidable of the candidates. It was going to be the most vicious. The news arrived in the stronghold of the Changing Stars faction at the darkest hour of the night. The scouts sent into the depths of the castle returned one after another, bringing with them shocking news. The castle guard had secretly launched an all-out assault on the stronghold held jointly by Gemma and Kido. The hunters were defeated, losing many of their numbers in the battle. Left without their protection, almost every artisan had been captured by the guards, while Kido herself had been killed by Tezai with his own 2 hands. After her death, Gemma and his surviving warriors had to flee. After the scouts made their report, a heavy silence settled over the stronghold. Everyone understood what was going to happen next. The faction formed by the alliance of the guards and the handmaidens had already been the most powerful of the 3. Now that all the artisans were in their hands and most of the castle was under their control, they would be coming for Changing Star and her people next. In that silence, Nephis looked around, at the pale faces of her followers, and said after a long and poignant pause, Stay strong. We will prevail. However, for the first time, her words did not seem to convince them. After a long and sleepless night, an unexpected visitor arrived in the stronghold. It was Gemma, the mighty leader of the hunters. The tall man looked very different from how he had before. His laid-back attitude was gone, replaced with dark exhaustion. His face was grim and ashen, and his light armor was torn and covered with blood. He wished to speak with Changing Star. After she arrived in front of him, Gemma offered her the services of his remaining men in the struggle against Tezai. She tilted her head and asked, her voice emotionless, What about your ambitions? Didn't you want to become the next lord? Gemma was silent for a long time, the fire extinguished in his eyes. Finally, he said, I never wanted to be a lord. It was Kido's wish. Now that damn butcher, now that she's dead, I don't care about the throne anymore. He paused, a mournful shadow veiling his eyes. But then, embers of scathing hatred ignited in its depths. Gemma gritted his teeth. All I care about is to see Tezai die. If you can promise me that you'll defeat him, I and my hunters will follow you to the end. Nephi's was silent for a while, considering his words. Finally, she turned away and answered, "Signal for you men to come. We have some food to share, so eat your fill. Prepare for tomorrow." With that, she walked away. Gemma stared at her back and yelled, "What happens tomorrow?" Changing Star paused for a moment, then answered without turning her head, "Tomorrow, I will kill Tezai." The next day, there were no scouts and no patrols sent out in the morning. Instead, everyone armed themselves, gathered together, and marched to the throne room. Nephis was walking at the head of her army, clad in the stark black and white armor of the Starlight Legion. On her breastplate, 7 shining stars were engraved. The Great Hall was just as they had left it 3 weeks ago. During that time, members of all 3 factions had gathered the bodies of their dead to give them proper burials, but the white marble floor was still painted red with blood. Tezai and his people were already waiting for them there. The morose giant was sitting on the throne, looking down from its height. In his hands there was a terrifying heavy mace, still wet from the slaughter. Sunny grimaced, noticing the difference between the 2 armies. Despite all their losses, there were still almost 100 guards left alive. Not only were they better equipped and trained than the slum dwellers, but now they also had the captured artisans on their side, supplying them with all kinds of tools, gear, and deadly inventions. The artisans themselves were beside them, some of them bound and chained, some simply intimidated into submission. Their faces were pale, frightened, and bloodied. From their position in front of the guards, it seemed as though Tezai was planning to use these poor people as a meat shield against Changing Star's assault. The handmaidens were also there, standing silently behind the guards. These quiet young women used to maintain the castle and complete various chores around it, but they were capable fighters as well. Since they had not participated in the furious battle that had happened after Gunlog's death, their number did not diminish by much. There were around 100 of them, too. Their leader, Saishan, was also there, at the base of the stairs that led to the throne. Looking at her, Sunny felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He couldn't explain it, but this beautiful and strange woman made him feel fear for some reason. At a first glance, Nephis had more people on her side. There were slightly more than 300 of them, comprised mostly of the surviving slum dwellers, with several dozen tributaries and a dozen or so hunters added into the mix. But really, only about a half of them was worth anything in the fight against the battle-hardened guards. Altogether, these were all the humans left alive in the Dark City. Just shy of 600. Everyone else was already dead, and how many more were going to die today? Chapter 307 Throne of Light. Chapter 307 Throne of Light. 2 forces stood against each other, the desecrated expanse of the Great Hall separating them, for now. The tense silence was full of bloodlust and dark apprehension. Sunny slowly made his way to the first row of the crowd, staring at the opposing mass of armored warriors with a complicated expression. From his point of view, followers of Changing Star had little chance of winning this battle. They simply had no advantage against the castle guard, with the exception of the fact that there were more bodies they could throw at the sharp blades of the enemy. Even if everyone here was mundane human, that would not have helped them prevail against a better armed and trained force. The fact that every single human in the throne room was a sleeper only made things worse. The potential difference in power between 2 awakened was much more vast than that between 2 mundane fighters. And yet, he didn't think that Nephis was going to lose, for that same reason. The guards might have been better equipped and more experienced than the slum dwellers, but they didn't have Changing Star on their side. They didn't have Effie, Castor, and Gemma. They didn't have Sunny. They only had 2 truly fearsome champions, Saishan and Tezai himself. At the end of the day, the outcome of this battle was going to be decided by those few who stood out from the sea of sleepers, impressive as everyone still surviving in the Dark City might have been, like tall and unassailable cliffs. Among the awakened, individual power was so much more important. And in terms of exceptional individuals, the Changing Star's side was far superior. So yes, Sunny felt confident that Nephi's was going to win. But at what cost? Out here on the Forgotten Shore, people had nowhere to retreat. So this battle was going to end only after one side was totally annihilated. And the closer to utter annihilation a faction would come, the more desperately its members would fight, like rats driven into a corner. When that happened, the bloodshed would only grow more terrible. Was it only going to stop when just a handful of the strongest and most resilient was left alive? As if reading his thoughts, Tezai suddenly chuckled and looked at the crowd of people gathered in the throne room with a bloodthirsty smile. Is that bastard actually looking forward to the slaughter? The morose giant then looked directly at Nephi and grinned. Changing Star. Ah, we meet again. But wait. Who is that beside you? Is that Gemma, my old friend? What a pleasant surprise. How considerate of you to bring him here. Now I won't have to search the whole castle for that filthy cockroach. With that, he slowly rose from the throne, put his terrifying mace on his shoulder, and descended from the stairs, dark fires igniting in his eyes. Have you come here to die, Changing Star? Nephi tilted her head and looked at Tezai with empty eyes. No. I came here to kill you. The giant laughed. Stepping on the marble floor, he stopped beside Saishin and bared his teeth in a vicious grin. The two of them looked truly fearsome together. The morose giant was like an incarnation of destruction and violence. His skin had turned slightly blue because of the invisible icy barrier that encased it. The air in the throne room suddenly became colder, with tiny snowflakes dancing in the beams of light. The mysterious leader of the handmaidens was reserved and elegant, but no less frightening. Saishin was exquisitely beautiful, cold, and inexorable. She was wearing a simple, but strangely regal dress, its velvet the color of red wine. There was an intricate silver necklace resting on her chest that accentuated her supple figure, and 2 bracelets on her wrists. Her most striking feature, however, was not her grace and not her beauty, but her skin. It was gray like stormy clouds, smooth like silk, and devoid of any imperfections. Just like Nephi, Saishin was one of those people whose appearance had been changed by their aspect. But in her case, that change was far more pronounced. It gave her an exotic and tantalizing, but outwardly inhuman look. Saishin's beauty was of the kind that put both longing and fear in a person's heart. When Tezai approached, she silently summoned her weapon and stared coldly at the crowd of slum dwellers. Many of them shivered and hurriedly looked away. A few moments later, a graceful war hammer appeared in her hand, one side of its head forged in the shape of a narrow beak. The morose giant laughed. Kill me? Haven't you tried already? If memory serves, the last time we fought, you ran away like a cowardly dog. What makes you think that today is going to be different, bitch? Nephi raised her chin slightly and met his mocking gaze with silence. Tezai shook his head. That look! I dreamed about wiping that arrogant look off your pretty face for a long time. Today I am going to teach you how to beg, girl. So what do you say? How about we finish this mess once and for all? The guards standing behind him laughed and readied their weapons, looking at the slum dwellers opposing them with contempt and dark anticipation. Followers of Changing Star gritted their teeth, closing their ranks and preparing to charge. The bloodshed was about to begin. Nephi summoned her silver sword and answered Tezai, her voice cold and indifferent. Let's. For a moment time slowed. With a bestial smile, the giant stepped forward. He opened his mouth, ready to give his soldiers the command to attack. A step behind, Saishin silently moved to follow him, and brought the beak of her war hammer on the back of Tezai's head, shattering his skull with one devastating strike. At the same time, the handmaidens who were standing behind the guards attacked the unsuspecting men with long knives that appeared out of their sleeves. These knives were not memories, and as such, did not take any time to weave themselves into reality or shine with ethereal light while doing so. Instead, they were fashioned out of steel, bone, and black obsidian. Just a moment later, the blades plunged into the flesh of the guards, ruthlessly slaughtering them. The handmaidens were aiming for their throats, hearts, and eyes. Blood streamed on the marble floors once again, and screams of terrified agony filled the air. By the time Tessai's soldiers realized what was happening, it was already too late. They had no chance to resist the treacherous attack. A dozen seconds later, everything was over. 100 powerful fighters were mercilessly eviscerated without even having a chance to raise their weapons. Their corpses lay on the floor, a look of horror and disbelief forever frozen on their faces. Only Tessai was still alive. Despite the fact that his skull was broken, the giant was still struggling to stand up, fury contorting the lines of his face. His disoriented attempts, however, were growing weaker with each second. A confused, pained roar escaped from his lips. As hundreds of sleepers stared in shock and horror, Nephi slowly walked across the great hall and stopped near him. Saishin, who was standing behind the giant, gave her a respectful bow. "Lady Changing Star." Sunny stared at her war hammer, which was wet with blood and bone matter, with splinters of bone sticking to its metal surface. An expression of recognition suddenly appeared on his face. The hammer, the mason's hammer, held in Saishin's graceful hand was the sixth shard memory. One that belonged to the walking colossus, the statue of the builder who had created the walls of the dark city. The sunlight shard. Nephi gave the beautiful woman a court nod. "Good job." Finally, the identity of the spy who had been helping her from within the castle was revealed. Then, she turned to the dying giant and stared at him. Nef's face was still and motionless, with no emotion appearing in her cold gray eyes. After a few moments, she said evenly, "I promise to kill you." With that, she raised her sword and pierced Tessai's heart with one swift, precise strike. The giant man shuddered, and then grew still. Retrieving her sword, Nephi closed her eyes and used it to support her weight for a few moments. A slight tremor ran through her body. The war for the throne was over. The bright castle had finally found its new lady. Chapter 308 Handmaiden. Chapter 308 Handmaiden. In the aftermath of the castle guard's annihilation, the core members of the cohort gathered in a small room that was situated not far away from the great hall. From there, they could hear the bodies of the slain guards being stripped of anything valuable and then dragged away to be disposed of, lest they attract the hordes of hungry nightmare creatures. Just like that, the former most powerful faction of the Bright Castle was no more. Judging by the expressions on everyone's faces, no one had been aware of the secret alliance between Nephi and the handmaidens. Perhaps with the exception of Cassie. But none of them dared to ask Changing Star about it. Well, Sunny had no such problem. Staring at their intrepid leader with a dubious expression, he said, "So when did you start working with Saishin?" Nephi glanced at him, then shrugged indifferently. "Soon after you left." A slight spark appeared in her eyes. "Why? Are you surprised?" Sunny remained silent for a bit, then shook his head. "No, not really. I figured out that your spy was one of the lieutenants a long time ago. I just didn't know which one. But I thought that either your cooperation ended with Gunlog's death, or that they double-crossed you as soon as you got rid of him for them." Changing Star smiled darkly. "She wouldn't." Sunny frowned slightly, then asked, his voice full of cold, calculating curiosity. "So why didn't she join your faction when all of this had started? Why go to such lengths to create this charade?" But then, he raised his hand to stop her from answering and grimaced. "Actually, don't say anything. I can guess. If the handmaidens joined us directly, the power of the faction would have been too immense. And that would pressure the other 3 lieutenants into joining forces against it instead of fighting among each other. Then, we would have really had to end things with an all-out battle. The last man standing wins. Right?" Nephi glanced at him and nodded. "Correct." Not only did the two of them prevent Tessai and Gemma from considering an alliance, but they also eviscerated the castle guard without losing a single follower. How diabolical! Even a treacherous cheat like Sunny couldn't help but be impressed. However, there was one problem. His frown returned, now even deeper than before. If memory serves, the last time we talked about your spy you said that she can never be trusted. You only trusted the information she provided. Why the change of heart? How come you were so confident that she would uphold her end of the deal? A pleasant, velvety voice suddenly came from behind him. Maybe I can explain myself. What the hell? With a startled expression, Sonny turned around and saw the beautiful woman standing right in front of him. Up close, she was even more striking, with her strange gray skin seemingly shining softly in the sunlight. How did she get so close without alerting neither me nor my shadow? He didn't like the fact that Saishin had been able to sneak up on him one bit. Things like that were not supposed to happen. The gorgeous woman, meanwhile, gave them a reserved bow and said, "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Song Se-shan." Suddenly, Castor's eyes narrowed. A strange expression appeared on his face. Sonny did not miss that sudden change. Well, the fact that our proud scion is reacting this way can mean only one thing. It's some legacy crap. Sonny stared at Saishin, seeing her in a new light. He studied every detail of her appearance, from the modest cut of her velvet dress to the glinting silver of her intricate necklace. She didn't look like a legacy. At least not the ones he had seen. However, one little detail of her appearance did give him pause. Noticing his gaze, Saishin offered a polite smile. "Ah. No, I am not a true descendant of the great clan Song. However, I have been raised and cared for by the clan leader herself, like many other girls orphaned by the nightmare spell. As such, it is my duty and ardent wish to return to the real world and repay my debt." She lingered for a few seconds, then lowered her eyes. "That is why, while you have no reason to trust in my character, you can at least trust in the fact that my wishes align with yours. I followed Gunlog because only he was able to give people a chance to survive the Forgotten Shore. And I will follow Lady Changing Star, because only she can give us a chance to escape it. This is my belief, and this is what I will do. She is Broken Sword's daughter, after all." Without having to discuss anything, everyone stared at Kai, who coughed and said in an embarrassed tone, Yeah? All of this is true. She is very sincere." Effie raised an eyebrow, then turned to Saishin and shrugged. "Well, welcome to the team, then? I guess." One after another, the other members of the cohort repeated her greeting. Sonny was the last to speak. When it was his turn to greet the beautiful handmaiden, however, he remained quiet. Soon, an awkward silence hung in the room. Sonny glanced at the rest of the people gathered there. Nephi's, Cassie, Effie, Castor, Kai, Saishin, and him. 7 people in total. A few moments later, he turned to Saishin and stared at her for a bit, then finally said, his voice strangely suppressed, "Welcome." She looked at him with a reserved smile. However, Sonny wasn't done talking. Quickly glancing somewhere left of Saishin's face, he hesitated for a little, and then added, "Oh, right. I almost forgot. I found something of yours. I think you dropped it." With that, he raised a hand. On his open palm, an intricate silver earring lay, one side of it covered with blood. Saishin looked at it for a few moments. Then, her lips suddenly parted, her smile turning wide and brilliant. Glancing at him with sparkling eyes, she said, "Thank you very much. Sonny, right? I thought I lost it." Her teeth were perfectly even, pearly, and spotlessly white. Chapter 309 Where Dreams May Come. Chapter 309 Where Dreams May Come. In the next week or so, things moved with terrible speed. Nephis became the ruler of the Bright Castle without any type of glorious ceremony or impassioned speech. No one questioned her authority, anyway, as though it was a simple fact of life. In a sense, it was. Sonny found it interesting, however, that she didn't take her seat on the white throne of the ancient citadel once. Even when there was a need for a large gathering, Changing Star sat on the last step of the stairs leading to the throne. As if making a point to show that the Bright Castle did not belong to her, or, perhaps, that she did not belong to the Bright Castle. At first, He was sure that Nephi's was going to push people to march on the Crimson Spire immediately, but she didn't even mention it. When he confronted her about her plans, she simply said that they were going to wait until the winter solstice came before making any decisions. It was just a few days away, anyway. In the meantime, everyone who was left alive had a lot to do. There were just 500 people in the Dark City now. In less than a month, the human population of the Forgotten Shore had been reduced by half. The outer settlement remained completely abandoned, but even then, there were barely enough people to maintain and guard the bright castle. Nevertheless, they persevered. The halls and corridors of the ancient citadel were cleaned of blood and corpses. The nightmare creatures that had found their way inside were methodically hunted down and eliminated. The breaches in the defensive lines they had created were located and repaired. Neff's watchmen assumed the role of the obliterated castle guard, manning the walls and protecting the stronghold from outside threats. The hunting parties resumed their expeditions into the ruins, with hunters from the outer settlement and the castle joining forces under the leadership of Effie and Gemma. Once again, there was food for everyone to eat and safety to enjoy, despite the harrowing hollowness and the absence of so many young men and women who had died in the turmoil of the bloody struggle for the throne, not to mention the invisible scars left on the souls of those who had survived. Things were slowly starting to resemble how they had been before. But behind this veil of normalcy, they were anything but. And the reason for that was Changing Star and her Crown of Dawn. With the help of the miraculous shard memory, humans of the Dark City were now able to not only hunt more nightmare creatures and with less risk, but also challenge fallen rulers of the cursed ruins. Not every one of these terrifying creatures could be killed without paying too terrible a price, of course. But after so many years on the Forgotten Shore, experienced hunters knew a lot about various horrors populating the city. Putting the knowledge together, they determined which ones they could challenge and survive. One after another, many powerful nightmare creatures were tracked down and slain. Suddenly, humans have become if not the apex species in the Dark City, then at least not the weakest one. By killing fallen abominations, Nephi's was achieving several goals simultaneously. She was steadily accumulating an arsenal of memories to arm every person in the castle. Some of those memories were even of the ascended rank, and the number of such powerful armaments slowly grew. She and her warriors also brought back large quantities of soul shards, which were then given to the inhabitants of the castle to absorb and grow stronger. In an ironic twist of fate, it appeared as though now, it was the Bright Lady who was paying tribute to her subjects, and not the other way around. This only made the respect and adoration people felt toward her grow stronger. But most importantly, perhaps, was the fact that through these hunts she was training her people to fight together as a cohesive force and prevail against creatures that were much more powerful than them. Guided by Cassie, the surviving artisans were hard at work, too. They were applying their mastery and craft to close any gaps in how the humans of the Dark City were equipped and supplied for the battle against the Dream Realm. However, the nature of their tasks was drastically different now. If they had been in charge of maintaining the lifestyle of people living in the castle as much as working to supply Gunlog's host with gear and equipment, now their only job was to create things people were going to need in battle. It was as though they were preparing for war. There were a few large projects that the artisans were working on that Sunny knew little about, too. These things were requested from them by Nephi's herself. He suspected that they were going to become useful once the time to attack the Crimson Spire finally came. Just like that, the winter solstice came. On this day, exactly a year ago, Sunny had arrived on the Forgotten Shore. It was hard to believe that he had survived here for so long. That any of them had. But it also seemed as though 1 year was not enough to encompass it all. It felt more like a lifetime. Several lifetimes, perhaps. It was also on this day, a year later, that Sunny turned 18. Remembering his previous birthday, a slight smile appeared on his lips. Back then, Cassie, who had been a complete stranger, offered him unexpected congratulations. He also made plans to celebrate his next birthday as an awakened by drinking a cup of coffee with lots of milk and sugar. Those dreams were not meant to come true. Instead, Sunny met his 18th birthday in an empty hall of the Tower of Dusk, practicing the steps of the shadow dance, sweat streaming down his lithe and strong body. These days, he felt that he was almost there. Just a little bit more, and the first level of mastery over his mysterious aspect legacy would be his. It was already in reach. One more thing happened on that day. As Sunny continued to train, the subtly familiar voice of the spells suddenly whispered into his ear. Frowny face. Your shadow has evolved. Chapter 310 Shadow Demon. Chapter 310 Shadow Demon. Lowering his sword, Sunny stood in the silence of the empty room for a while. In the window, the distant axis of the Crimson Spire loomed, the light of dawn slowly painting it red. A subtle smile appeared on his face. Ah! Thank you, spell? What a nice birthday present! Summoning the endless spring, he greedily drank delicious cold water and then sat on the floor, crossing his legs and drawing a few deep breaths. Let's take a look. Leaving his worries behind, Sunny dove into the Soul Sea and walked past the rows of motionless shadows. A long time ago, there had been just a handful of them. Now, hundreds of dark silhouettes watched silently as he approached the tenebrous sun of the Shadow Core. Among them were all kinds of horrors, creatures whose appearance alone would drive weaker men insane. The Mountain King was there. The Black Knight was there, too. The terrifying Spire Messenger stood lifelessly on the tranquil surface of the water, and there were humans, too. Haruz was among them, and so was Harper. Sunny didn't pay them any attention. Standing beneath the Shadow Core, he sighed and summoned the runes. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Dreamer. Shadow Core, Dormant. Shadow Fragments, 977/1000. He was so close to accumulating the whole 1,000. If Sunny really wanted to, he could have abandoned caution and pushed to reach it before the inevitable journey to the Crimson Spire. However, he was wary of delving into anything unknown right before the fateful confrontation. He also felt that his time was better spent consolidating and perfecting everything that he had already learned and earned, not wasting it trying to acquire something new. Still, it was not an easy decision. With a sigh, he continued reading. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Ordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn. Endless Spring, Blood Blossom, Moonlight Shard, Old Weaver's Mask. Echoes, Shadows. He tilted his head and read, an amused expression appearing on his face. Marble Saint. Marble? How fitting. Without wasting any more time, he summoned his shadow from the depths of the core. She appeared in a whirlwind of black flames, standing in front of him with her usual taciturn aloofness. However, Sunny couldn't help but gasp. The saint was indeed changed. She grew taller and was now even more oppressive. Her graceful stone-like armor, which had looked as though it was cut from granite before, was now entirely black and glossy, like obsidian, or onyx. In fact, it was very much like the shattered onyx armor he had purchased with Kai's help. Her skin, on the contrary, became smooth and as white as alabaster. At least a small portion of it he could see through the visor of the helmet. Saint seemed much stronger, aware, deadly. But that was not what made Sunny gasp. The thing that stunned him was what hid beneath the armor. Within the shadow that populated Saint's body, there used to be 2 ethereal dark embers. But now, there were 3. Sunny stared at her for a while. Did she rise to a higher class? Finally, he calmed down and made the runes describing the shadow appear. A moment later, his hopes were proved true. Shadow, Marble Saint. Shadow rank, awakened. Shadow class, demon. Demon! She is a shadow demon now. Shadow attributes. Battle master, stalwart, spark of divinity. The next line had not been there before. Sunny held his breath. Shadow abilities. Weapon sage. Underworld armament. He lingered for a moment, trying to suppress a triumphant smile. He had always known that Saint was not a typical nightmare creature. But to think that she would acquire an actual ability before even becoming a devil, and not just 1, but 2, burning with anticipation, he read on. Weapon sage ability description. Shadow Saint can effectively wield any weapon-type memory. Underworld Armament Ability Description: Shadow Saint's armor can accommodate a charm memory to inherit its enchantments. Sunny was silent for a bit, then turned his head and stared at the taciturn monster. No, not monster. Demon. A satisfied smile finally appeared on his face. Ah! How wonderful! Not only had his shadow grown tremendously stronger, but she now also had the ability to use any weapon he would provide for her, as well as reinforce her armor with all kinds of powerful enchantments. The possibilities this could provide her were truly endless. The potential combinations, the flexibility, all it took was to find proper memories. Sunny shook his head and grinned. Before, he had sometimes thought that Saint was really suited to command an army. But now, he understood that he had been wrong. She was the army. A few hours later, the members of Nef's cohort gathered on the roof of the old hunting lodge, which still stood at the edge of the slum. Saishin was also there, which made Sunny slightly uncomfortable. He didn't let it show on his face, however. The outer settlement was desolate and empty. There were no desperate, hungry youths around anymore. All of them were now either safely hidden behind the castle walls, or dead. It was just the 7 of them. They came to see Kai off. The charming archer was standing near the edge of the roof, checking his equipment for the last time. He was wearing a new stylish armor, and a leather jacket with fur on its collar. On his back, there was a quiver full of arrows and a backpack with water, food, and other supplies necessary for a long journey. Sunny didn't know about the rest, but his heart was heavy. As though reading his thoughts, Kai turned around and smiled. Really, guys, don't worry. I'll be fine. This is not my first time spending some quality time in the labyrinth. No one answered, knowing that the mission entrusted to Nightingale this time was especially dangerous, but also important. He had to leave the Dark City and explore the vastness of the Forgotten Shore in search of new humans sent here by the spell. Today was the day of the winter solstice, and that meant that out there in the real world, thousands upon thousands of sleepers were currently preparing to enter the pods and arrive in the dream realm. Sunny sighed. Just don't bring back anyone as irritating as you, alright? Kai chuckled. No promises. With that, he waved them goodbye. Well, wish me luck. A few moments later, he was gone, turning into a small dot in the sky. The remaining 6 people stared at it for a long time, their faces somber. Their future depended on what Kai would discover. Their and that of everyone else still clinging to life on the Forgotten Shore. Chapter 3:11 The Last. Chapter 3:11 The Last. A few days passed in tense anticipation. Sunny spent them doing the same things he had been doing before, training and preparing mentally for what was about to come. He had a lot of things to do. First came his technique, which was based on the flowing battle style that Nephi's had taught him, with elements of Shadow Saint's grounded style added to its adaptive foundation. His skill was growing sharper and sharper, slowly being elevated and solidified at the level that his current understanding of combat allowed. Sunny was not a novice anymore. He survived hundreds of deadly battles, and each left him stronger and more experienced than he had been before. But perfecting his technique was still not easy, because he had to make himself indomitable first, and then turn that firmness into flexibility. Now that Sunny finally had free time, he also used it to adapt his style to the new reality of his improved physical limits. Many things that had not been possible for him before the journey to the Hollow Mountains became possible now. The way he approached combat had to change, too. All of it took effort and a lot of thought to achieve. Second came the shadow dance. Sunny was still at the stage where he was slowly forming a practical set of moves to train in that elusive style. He felt as if he was now only one final step away from turning his vision of the shadow dance into reality. However, he seemed to be lacking some crucial ingredient. He needed one last push, one moment of inspiration to make that final step. Still, his exercises weren't useless. Until that moment of inspiration came, they helped condition his body and mind, make them adaptable and malleable like shadows. When the last revelation appeared, they would be able to receive it. After each intense training session, every muscle in his body ached, and a wave of mental fatigue washed over him. Third came the most important task. He had to turn his mind and soul into a fortress that would withstand the shock of the future. He had to achieve the type of clarity that would allow him to emerge victorious on the other end of it all, and for now, this task was turning out to be the most unattainable. It was hard to shape one's body and mind into a perfect tool, but it was so much harder to do the same with one's soul. However, this was exactly the barrier he had to overcome. Just like that, 6 days passed. On the 7th day after his departure, Kai finally returned. The charming young man seemed tired and ragged, his armor and clothes covered in dirt, dust, and dried blood. The quiver of arrows he had taken with him was now empty, and there were shallow cuts on the fabric of his jacket. Sunny's shadow had kept watching the skies above the bright castle all this time, so he was one of the first to know. By the time Sunny arrived at the small room that served as Nef's council chamber, Kai was already there, sitting by the fire and greedily drinking water from a crude clay cup. Effie was by his side, pushing a plate of food into his hands. Noticing him, Kai smiled weakly. "Hey, Sunny." Sunny hesitated for a bit, then approached the beautiful young man and patted him on the shoulder. "Hey, Kai. Welcome back." Neither he nor Effie spoke after then, giving their friend an opportunity to catch his breath and waiting for the rest to come. One after another, Cassie, Castor, and Saishan appeared in the room and greeted Kai. Nephis was the last to enter. She glanced at everyone and then sat down near Kai. After hesitating for a few moments, she looked him in the eyes and asked, "How many?" Kai remained silent for a while, a solemn expression slowly appearing in his eyes. Finally, he turned away and sighed. One word escaped his lips. "None." His voice echoed in the small room, making the faces of people gathered there darken. "I scoured the labyrinth, looking for any sign that a sleeper passed there recently. But there were none. There was no one alive and no bodies, not even a single fresh bone that I could find. The spell, it did not send anyone to this hell, not this year. And it won't the next one too." "Just as I thought," Sunny sighed. "Sometimes, it was nice to be mistaken. 15 years ago, the spell had sent 7 people to the Forgotten Shore. The next year, it had been twice as much, and then more and more. Eventually, hundreds of sleepers had been arriving in the Dark City after each winter solstice, up until last year, when only 4 of them, Sunny, Nephis, Cassie, and Castor, had come. 3 more had perished in the labyrinth without ever reaching the cursed ruins. Because of that, inhabitants of the Bright Castle came up with a theory that the number of people sent to this region of the dream realm by the spell followed a certain cycle. If they had been right, then at least 14 sleepers would have appeared somewhere in the labyrinth a week ago. But Sunny never believed in that theory. In his mind, the 4 of them had never been meant to start a new cycle. He had always thought that, instead, they were meant to be the last chance the spell had given to the people of the Forgotten Shore, and now, he knew that he had been right. With a sigh, Nephis slowly nodded and stared at the fire burning in the hearth for a bit. Everyone stood silently, waiting for her to make a decision. Finally, she said without looking at them, "Tell everyone to gather in the throne room. I will speak to them." Without wasting any time, Castor bowed slightly and left the room. Effie gave her a short look, and then followed him. So did the rest. Sunny was the last one to leave, his heart beating like a drum. It is beginning. Chapter 3:12 Invisible Chains. Chapter 3:12 Invisible Chains. 500 people stood silently in the magnificent great hall of the ancient castle. Beams of sunlight were falling through the tall windows, making the air appear bright and effervescent. There was no sign left of the terrible bloodshed that had happened in this hall just a few weeks ago. The bodies were dragged away, the blood washed off the marble floors, but the memory of it remained. On the steps leading to a beautiful throne of white marble sat a young woman with silver hair. Her ivory face was distant, and her clear gray eyes were calm and heavy. Hundreds of people were looking at her, waiting quietly for their lady to speak. Finally, Changing Star sighed. A moment later, her voice resounded in the throne room, reaching far and wide. Dreamers of the Forgotten Shore. A week ago, I sent several scouts into the labyrinth to look for those young men and women who, like us, were sent to this cursed place. Among them was Nightingale, whom you all know. He spent 7 days searching for them. But he didn't find anyone. Not even a single sign of their passing. This year, no one has come. A wave of stunned whispers ran through the crowd. Sunny glanced at the faces of people gathered in the great hall, noticing different expressions on them. Confusion, fear, shock. However, it wasn't as bad as he had expected. No one seemed to become consumed by utter despair. Instead, all of them turned to Nephi's, hope burning in their eyes. She was their hope. Until Changing Star was with them, they weren't going to give in to despair. Indifferent to hundreds of eyes observing her every move, Neph continued. Many of you understand what that means. To those who don't, I will explain. She lingered for a moment, throwing a glance at the walls of the ancient citadel. When she spoke, her voice seemed solemn. For many years, this castle served as a fortress for the humans sent to the Forgotten Shore. Some of you enjoyed the safety it offered, while others survived in the shadow of its walls. But none of us would have been here if not for the bright castle. It offered us protection against the dreadful beasts of the Dark City. It offered us shelter. However, this shelter was never free. A dark expression appeared on her face. Some people lost their souls to preserve it. And many more lost their lives. Every year, hundreds of human lives were sacrificed to allow the bright castle to exist. And every year, hundreds more came to be thrown into its maw. Sunny silently scoffed. She was making it sound as though the castle was some creature that fed on human lives, not unlike the Soul Devourer, really. The meaning was subtle enough to not be obvious, but still affect the people gathered in the throne room. Observing them, he saw many sleepers shiver and frown. Insidious. Meanwhile, Nephi's continued. But no more. There won't be anyone coming to the Dark City this year, just like no one will come after that. Without new people, the losses we suffer will slowly accumulate, until there is no one to man the walls, no one to fight off the nightmare creatures, no one to keep these halls safe. Until there is no more shelter. This end. She made a pause, and then said calmly and with frightening finality, is inevitable. Her words crashed into the crowd of sleepers, causing a storm of emotions. Their eyes widened and their faces paled. The shock and fear they had felt grew tenfold. As if to hammer the last nail into the coffin of their worldview, Changing Star said. Which means only one thing. We cannot remain in the bright castle anymore. Screams rose from the crowd, full of disbelief and terror. There were many things people were trying to say, but they all boiled down to 3. What do we do? How do we save ourselves? And save us, Changing Star. Sunny smiled. Nephi's remained silent for a while, letting the chorus of screams wash over her. And then, white flames ignited in her eyes, making everyone fall silent. Her voice resounded once more between the walls of the great hall, penetrating through the crowd like a sharp blade. But this not the end of us. A long time ago, I made you a promise. And I intend to keep it. She suddenly rose, towering over the crowd like a shining, ruinous angel. Come with me. Follow me. Only I know how to save you. The radiance of her flames reflected in the eyes of hundreds of people, making it seem as though their faces shone with an inner light. Her words had submerged them into utter darkness, and then gave them a beacon to find a way out of it. That beacon burned with the most seductive of lights, the light of hope. And that hope was synonymous with her. Changing Star slowly descended from the steps, her words echoing from the marble walls of the throne room. Follow me, and I will lead you out of this hell. Follow me, and I will show you the path back to your homes. But make no mistake. She stopped and remained silent for a few long moments. When she spoke again, her voice sounded calmer, colder, heavier. The road ahead will be long and arduous. Not everyone will make it. The weak will die. The strong will die too. And those who remain won't be the same. But there is one thing I can promise you. Nephi entered the crowd and looked at the people surrounding her with absolute resolve burning in her beautiful eyes. Follow me, and you will never be slaves. Sunny shivered, feeling as though she was speaking to him alone. Everyone in the great hall felt the same way, perhaps. Staring directly into their souls, Changing Star spoke. Slaves to your fear, slaves to your fate, slaves to the nightmare spell. Come with me, and whether you live or die, you will do so, humans. Not cowering beasts. She closed her eyes and exhaled, then looked down. Finally, she said, the passion disappearing from her voice. But I will not force anyone to follow me. Ever. Whether you come with me or stay, it is your choice. There is no shame in staying. Those who do not wish to go may leave this hall right now. Sunny looked at the sleepers, trying to guess what their reaction would be. People were staring at each other, doubt and fear written on their faces. Not everyone was enthralled by Changing Star. Not everyone was brave and strong. Not everyone was ready to die fighting. But in the end, not a single one of them left. Nephi sighed and slowly turned her head west, as though trying to pierce the stone of the castle walls with her gaze. After a while she said, Good. I am glad. Then it's decided. She turned to face them, furious white flames illuminating her pale face. Then the day after tomorrow, we will leave the bright castle. The day after tomorrow, we march on the Crimson Spire. Chapter 3:13 Starlight Shard. Chapter 3:13 Starlight Shard. In the last day they would spend in the Dark City, Nephis led a small group of her most powerful warriors on one last hunt. The members of her cohort were all following behind her. Sunny, who stubbornly refused to accept his status as one of them, walked apart from the group, idly looking around and observing the ruins. Gemma and Saishan were also with them, as well as 10 or so of the most experienced hunters, some of them formerly from the host, some formerly from the outer settlement. There was no difference between the two anymore. All of them were simply Changing Star's people now. As they were walking, Gemma approached Sunny and glanced at him with curiosity. After Tez's eye had fallen to Nef's blade, the tall man seemed to have found some measure of peace. Somewhere deep in his eyes, however, there always was a hint of sorrow. Sunny stared at him and raised an eyebrow. What? The hunter smiled slightly and asked in a friendly tone. You're Sunless, right? Sunny shrugged. Yeah, that's me. Gemma silently measured him and then asked with interest. I've heard that you lived for months alone in the city. Is that true? Ah, makes sense. The tall man was perhaps the most experienced hunter on the Forgotten Shore. He had survived countless battles on the streets of the Cursed City. It was natural for him to be curious about this matter. Sunny gave him a nod. Sure. A little over 3 months, I guess. Gemma rubbed his chin, then asked bluntly. How did you survive? Sunny grinned. How had he managed that, indeed? Lots of hiding, lots of killing. A modicum of madness, and a little bit of luck. Gemma stared at him for a bit, then chuckled. Sound about right, I guess. After a while, he glanced forward at Changing Star and asked in a curious tone. Do you know what we are going to hunt today? Sunny looked at him with surprise. She didn't tell you. The tall man hesitated, then shook his head. She did. I'm just not sure that I believe it. Sunny smiled and looked away. Let me guess. Your first thought was that she had lost her mind. What can I say? Get used to that feeling. After a few moments of silence, Gemma sighed. But how can we kill it? Poor guy. Sunny glanced at him, lingered for a bit, and then said, If my guess is correct, you know more about it than I do. And just like that, their conversation ended. By the middle of the day, they reached the eastern edges of the city and climbed the imposing monolith of the Great Wall. Standing on top of it, they saw the colossal crater and the headless statue that stood not too far away, its one remaining hand thrust toward the skies. Their prey was hiding in a vast underground chamber beneath that statue. Today, they were going to hunt the Lord of the Dead. At the base of the statue, the second arm of the priestess lay in the mud. Thousands of years ago, it had broken off and fell, crashing through the dome of the underground chamber. Now, there was a chasm in the ground that led into the lair of the Lord of the Dead. Many months ago, Sunny and the rest had used that breach to escape from the catacombs. Now, they were going to use it to descend into that darkness. Instead, the ghastly master of the catacombs waited for them below. Sunny wasn't really surprised that Nephi had chosen to return to this place. After all, the mountainous abomination was most likely guarding the last of the 7 shard memories. However, he was really curious about how exactly she was planning to kill it. Once everyone gathered around the hole in the mud, Changing Star glanced at him and said, "Sunny, can your shadow take a look at the burial chamber?" With a shrug, he sent the shadow into the breach. It slid on the mud and entered the dark hole, then hid in the palm of the giant stone hand and cautiously looked down. The mountain of human bones was still there, in the middle of the vast circular chamber. However, it looked very different from how it had been before. Countless green vines were growing from the mass of bones, some of them comparatively thin, others as thick as a human body. They weren't growing just between the ancient remains, the vines were bursting through the bones, too. Almost as if feeding on them, the Lord of the Dead seemed weaker, more brittle. As though it was sick, sapped of its strength and infected by a terrible parasite. Sunny commanded his shadow to look closer, and finally noticed the thing that he had expected to see. A small wooden box lay on the floor of the underground chamber, open and empty. The exact same box Nephi had mysteriously entrusted to Castor as soon as they were back in the Dark City. From the words "the outer settlement hunter," that box had appeared on his pillow with a small note. That note had been written by Changing Star's spy, Saishin. And the contents of the box had been created for her by Kido, who was now dead. Kido had been the leader of the artisans. Her aspect ability allowed her to control and alter plants. This bone-eating vine, as it turned out, was her last creation and final masterpiece. Turning to Nephi, Sunny hesitated for a moment and then spoke, his words causing a subtle reaction in Gemma. "The tyrant is heavily infected by Kido's vine. It seems to be considerably weakened." Changing Star nodded and remained silent for a few moments. Then she said, "Once we enter the chamber, the Lord of the Dead will attack us. Now that its power is reduced, and with the help of the Dawn Shard, we should be able to survive the onslaught. We should also be able to wound, and eventually kill it." Looking at the faces of everyone gathered in the shadow of the headless statue, she nodded and headed toward the breach. "Let's go." Soon, Sunny was trying to survive the fury of the Lord of the Dead once again. But this time, it was not as hard as it had been before. He had become stronger, and the horrible creature had become weaker. His memories were augmented by the Crown of Dawn, and Saint was now a demon. There were also more humans resisting the tyrant today. That was not to say that the battle wasn't harrowing and perilous. In fact, it was utterly lethal. The humans fighting the monumental nightmare creature were surrounding it, dodging the long limbs of the tyrant, and trying to attack it when an opportunity presented itself. Kai was zipping in the air, providing support and bringing the wounded away from the fight. They were only alive because the attacks of the Lord of the Dead were now slower and less devastating than before. With some preparation, both Effie and Saint could withstand 1 or 2 with the help of their shields. Castor was able to deliver several cuts to it with its ghostly blade, while Saishin had broken one limb completely with her graceful war hammer. Each strike of the sunlight shard seemed to bring immense pain to the Lord of the Dead, but nothing hurt it more, of course, than the incandescent blade of Changing Star. Together, they dealt more and more damage to the terrible creature, despite the fact that many of them were now either severely wounded or dead. The tyrant was being consumed from within by the green vines, and broken from the outside by their weapons. And then, after a long and arduous battle, a huge layer of bones fell from the body of the Lord of the Dead, revealing its inner core. That core, which was made of human skulls and coagulated blood, was absolutely terrifying, malignant, and abhorrent. In its depth, a shape of a fat white maggot could be seen, curled into a ball. At that moment, Effie suddenly stepped forward, twisted her body, and threw the dusk shard as a discus with a deafening cry. The shield that was said to contain the weight of the heavens streaked through the air with terrible speed and hit the inner core of the tyrant, crushing through it like a wrecking ball. It cut the maggot in half and exited the body of the Lord of the Dead from the other side in a torrent of broken bones. Then it fell to the ground, shattering the stone floor of the chamber and sending a net of cracks running through it from the point of impact. The mountain of bones froze, shuddered, and then it crumbled. Everyone stared at Effie, shocked, hope burning in their eyes. On her face, there was a dark, mournful expression. Belatedly, Sunny remembered that the members of the original cohort that the boisterous huntress had belonged to all perished here, killed either by the undead army or the Lord of the Dead itself. A few moments later, Effie sighed and turned her face away, hiding it from everyone. Then, she raised a hand and made it into a fist. That was her letting them know that she had received a memory from the killed. A shard memory. The last one there was. Chapter 3:14 Leaving the Dark City. Chapter 3:14 Leaving the Dark City. After everything was done and Nephice used her flames to heal those who survived, they returned to the city through the catacombs. Perhaps she wished to eviscerate the army of undead monsters that were now left without the tyrant to bring them back to life. But in the end, they were met with nothing but silence. The horde of ferocious skeletons that had once almost cost Sunny and the rest of the cohort their lives was no more. The dark tunnels stretching beneath the ruins were littered with piles of bones, which were slowly turning into dust. It seemed as though the moment the Lord of the Dead had been destroyed, its servants had perished, too. After a while, the group of humans emerged from the collapsed tower of the lighthouse and continued on its way back to the bright castle. They were going to spend their last night there before leaving the dark city behind. ******* In a small room in the depths of the ancient citadel, 7 people gathered around a table. They were Sunny, Nephice, Cassie, Castor, Effie, Kai, and Sishan. Beyond the walls of the castle, the absolute darkness of the night had devoured the world. Nightmare creatures were prowling the cursed ruins, and somewhere far away, black waves were crashing against the indomitable granite surface of the city wall. Inside, the cold light of a memory lantern illuminated their faces. Strangely, everyone was silent, as though not sure what to say. Finally, Sunny broke the silence by yawning loudly. "Shall we get on with this? Tomorrow is going to be a long day, and some of us need their beauty sleep." He threw a sideways glance at Kai, thought for a bit, and then added, "Actually, every day after today is going to be a long one. So let's just do it." Nephi stared at him for a few moments, then echoed his words. "Do it." With that, they summoned their memories. An austere tachi and a ghostly stiletto appeared in Sunny's hands. A graceful war hammer with a narrow beak appeared in Sishan's. Effie summoned her beautiful bronze spear and a heavy round shield. Finally, a simple band of metal decorated with a single gem weaved itself from light and rested gently on Changing Star's head. They were the shard memories: dawn, zenith, dusk, midnight, sunlight, moonlight, and starlight. The last memory was a short, flowing white cloak that draped itself around Effie's shoulders. This was the shard she had received after slaying the Lord of the Dead. For a few moments, no one moved. Then Effie said, "So, what now?" Nephi titled her head a little, then frowned. Finally, after some time passed, she said, "Come closer." When they did, something unexpected happened. Sunny felt the hilts of his weapons suddenly growing hotter, and soon, both Midnight and Moonlight Shard began emanating a ghostly, ethereal light. The same was happening to the other shards. 7 beams of light shot toward the center of the room and collided. Then, they fused with each other, and soon, 7 objects weaved themselves from that light and hovered in the air. They were keys forged out of lustrous metal, with 7 shining stars engraved on their surface. It was the manifestation of the terrible oath that the 7 heroes had given all those thousands of years ago. The keys that were used to seal the curse of the all-consuming darkness underground. Suddenly, the 7 keys turned into streams of light and shot toward each of the 7 people gathered in the room. 1 beam hit Sunny in the chest and disappeared, absorbed into his core. The voice of the spell resounded in his ear's frowny face. "You have received an oath key." Sunny shivered. He didn't want anything to do with that morbid oath. But in the end, he had no other choice. Glancing at the rest of the people gathered in the room, Changing Star lingered for a moment, and then said, "We're ready." In the dim light of dawn, the gates of the castle opened for the last time. A long procession of humans walked through them, leaving the ancient citadel that had sheltered them for so long. They walked under the swinging skulls, not paying them any attention. In the aftermath of all the strife, no one had bothered to remove the ghastly things from their chains. It was not like anyone could have forgotten the hundreds of lives lost in the struggle, and thousands of deaths before that. Even if the skulls were removed. 500 people descended the hill and entered the Dark City. A few nightmare creatures tried to attack them, and were eviscerated before managing to do any harm. These 500 humans were not a defenseless crowd. They were a battle-hardened army, one comprised of exceptionally powerful sleepers, the most powerful sleepers to ever be born from the human race, perhaps. They moved the ruins, cutting down anything that dared to block their path. Soon, the sleepers approached the western boundary of the Dark City and scaled the ancient wall. There, they stopped and turned, staring at the silhouette of the bright castle in solemn silence. By then, pillars of black smoke were billowing from each of its windows. Soon, the whole castle was enveloped by furious flames, which slowly devoured the white stone of its walls. The magnificent marble cracked and melted, destroyed by the terrible heat. The smaller towers swayed and moved, and then fell into the terrible crucible. The fire was slowly destroying the bright castle, turning it into a molten ruin. In a sense, this was fitting. After all, everything else in the Dark City had been ruined a long time ago. Surprisingly, this act of destruction was not Changing Star's idea. She wasn't the one who ordered to burn the bright castle behind them, like a final gesture to hammer it into everyone's souls that there was no way back anymore. Sunny would have expected something like that from Nephi's. But no, it was the decision of the people themselves. They wanted to destroy the ancient citadel, because they hated it. They hated these ancient, blood-soaked stones only a little bit less than they needed them to survive, and now that they were leaving, they wanted to erase the bright castle from existence. Perhaps if it was gone, the memories of all the darkness that they had witnessed there, and were the perpetrators of, would disappear with it. After a while, the misshapen, twisted silhouette of the dying fortress was completely hidden by the fire and smoke. Slowly, the silent sleepers turned away from that sight and looked far away into the distance. They were looking west. That was where they were going. To lay siege to the Crimson Spire. 1 after another, the sleepers descended from the wall and left the Dark City behind. Chapter 3:15 Siege of the Crimson Spire 1. Chapter 3:15 Siege of the Crimson Spire 1. In the cold light of dawn, a gargantuan crimson tower was rising from the labyrinth. From this distance, it looked like a bloodied sword that some primordial titan had thrust into the heavens. The crimson coral streamed from its walls like the blood of gods, spreading out from the base of the spire to devour all of the forgotten shore. The tower itself seemed to stand on an island, which was surrounded from all sides by black water. Even though the sun was already climbing up, this part of the cursed sea did not disappear. Instead, it lingered and moved endlessly, forming a giant whirlpool. Unclear shapes could be seen moving under the surface of the black water, drowning the hearts of humans who dared to approach the spire with dread. Sunny looked up, at the endless expanse of the Crimson Tower, and paled. Up close, it looked even more ominous, oppressive, and terrifying. He struggled to believe that this cyclopean structure had been built by human hands, let alone that it had been their salvation once, a long time ago. Now, the Crimson Spire looked nothing but twisted, eerie, and utterly evil. It emanated a sense of harrowing power that no human could ever hope to challenge, and yet, this was exactly what they were going to do. Turning away, he glanced at the camp of the Dreamer army. For the past week, the 500 of them had traversed the labyrinth to reach this place. Some had perished along the way, but not as many as he had expected. For that short journey, luck had been on their side. In these days, they had slaughtered countless nightmare creatures and somehow managed to avoid attracting the wrath of the dwellers of the deep. They had seen the headless statue of the Lord that stood halfway between the Dark City and the Crimson Spire, and many other wondrous and terrible things. And now, they had almost reached their goal. People were busy preparing for the battle. The dread they had felt at dawn, after looking at the Crimson Spire, which was now so close, turned into grim determination and resolve. Everyone was making final preparations. Some were checking their armor and weapons for the last time. Some were hurriedly building makeshift fortifications. Some were praying, begging the dead gods to save their lives. Truth be told, Sonny was the only person who appeared to be idle. Well, what did they expect? Nephi still had not told him what exactly his role in the battle was going to be. Not that he was obligated to listen, of course. With a sigh, he turned to the other members of the cohort, who were gathered around a fire, discussing the plan of the battle for the 100th time. Everyone seemed uncharacteristically somber today. One after another, they left to join in the preparations. Soon, Changing Star was the only one left. With a bit of reluctance, Sonny approached her and sat down, staring at the fire. After a while he said, "This is very strange, don't you think?" She glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. Nephi's had changed a lot since the first time they met, but also remained exactly the same. She was still calm and confident, with ivory skin and beautiful silver hair. She was still strong and full of conviction. It's just that her eyes seemed a bit hollow these days. "What is?" Sonny shrugged. "Just all of it. If someone described this scene to me a year ago, I would have been really perplexed. And yet here we are." He lingered for a bit, and then added, "We've come very far. The three of us." Both of them glanced at Cassie, who was busy explaining something to the artisan representatives. Her delicate hand rested on the hilt of the quiet dancer. After a while, Nephi nodded. "Yes. And now, we just need to make one last step." Both of them remained silent for a bit, thinking about how this final step was going to be the hardest yet. Incomparably so. Then, Sonny sighed. "So, what do you want me to do? From how you kept avoiding the subject for these past days, I'm guessing that it's not something trivial." Changing Star smiled, then looked at him with white sparks dancing in her eyes. "A really small thing, really." Then, she turned to face the Crimson Spire, hesitated for a while, and then suddenly said, "Give me your hand." When Sonny did, something traveled through her cool skin into his shadow core. He summoned the runes and looked at them, already knowing what he was going to see. And there it was, listed among his memories, Oath Key 7. Somehow, she had gathered the remaining 6 keys from the rest. And now, she was entrusting them to Sonny. Still looking at the Cyclopean Tower, Nephi said, "I want you to destroy the Dark Sea. Or banish it, at least." Sonny grinned. "A really small thing, indeed." Very soon, the sun rose higher, and the dark whirlpool surrounding the Crimson Spire became a little smaller. Several bridges of red coral rose from its depths, connecting the island to the rest of the forgotten shore. And out there on the island, countless silhouettes suddenly began to move, crawling out of the crimson mounds. They were the nightmare creatures guarding the cursed tower. All kinds of horrors were among them. There were members of the Carapace Legion, scavengers, centurions, and demons. There were colonies of carnivorous worms, giant centipedes that secreted corrosive oil, and eerie vines that crawled on the ground like snakes. There were creatures that looked like black masses of rotten bones, and creatures that looked like humanoids made of rock, with terrible maws full of jagged fangs. There were swarms of translucent insects that devoured everything in their path and massive spiders clad in iron armor. There were beasts that could shoot deadly bone spears from their bodies and beasts that could turn their prey to stone with their gaze. There were corpses with red flowers growing from the holes in their flesh and giant abominations that resembled praying mantises, if those were made of glass and blood-red clay. And many more that Sunny had never seen, fought, or could describe. All of them moved together in strange harmony, devoid of the usual territorial aggression that forced the nightmare creatures of different tribes to fight each other. They were subjugated by the Crimson Terror and now served to guard the spire. Like a terrible wave, the horde of monsters rolled over the bridges of crimson coral and flowed toward the human army. From his position at the back of it, Sunny could clearly see the bodies of those standing in the front line tremble and take an involuntary step back. Someone even dropped their weapon. A moment later, Effie's loud voice rolled over the rows of sleepers. "Stand your ground, wretches! If anyone runs, I'll kill you myself!" Strangely, her irritated shout calmed down the fear in their hearts. A moment later, however, it was drowned in the cacophony of the approaching horde. The battle for the Crimson Spire had begun.